The clinking of glasses and the low, self-congratulatory hum of conversation felt like a distant symphony, a soundtrack for a movie in which Alara was merely an actress. She sat at the round table, the crisp, almost painfully white linen a stark contrast to the swirling, chaotic sea of emotions within her. The grand ballroom, with its impossibly high, frescoed ceilings and heavy velvet drapes the color of old wine, was a world away from the cramped, windowless cubicle where her journey had begun. This was the kind of room she had only seen in magazines, a space designed to make people feel both important and insignificant at the same time. Tonight, it was supposed to be the pinnacle, the final resounding validation of years of relentless work, of nights that bled into mornings, of an unwavering, almost fanatical belief in a project everyone else had deemed impossible. The Innovator of the Year award, a gleaming crystal statuette, sat at the center of the main stage, catching the light from the ornate chandeliers and refracting it into 100 tiny, taunting rainbows. Her name was etched into its base, Alara Vance. Not a team member, not a subordinate, not one of the girls from R&D, but the architect of a revolution. Her husband, Thomas, squeezed her hand under the table, his warm grip a familiar anchor in the dizzying tide. He leaned in, his breath smelling faintly of the champagne he'd been sipping, his voice a gentle murmur against her ear. "You see that? That's for you. You earned every single piece of it, Alara. All the stress, all the doubters. This is the result." He smiled, and the deep crinkles around his eyes spoke of a shared journey, of him brewing late-night coffees and listening to her rehearse presentations until 3 a.m., of being the unwavering voice of encouragement when she was on the verge of giving up. She tried to smile back, a genuine, radiant smile that matched the glittering occasion, but it felt like a costume she couldn't quite fit into, a mask that was 2 sizes too small. Because across the room, a ghost from her past had just materialized, casting a long, cold shadow over her triumph. Meredith. The name itself was a cold stone in the pit of her stomach, a jolt of ice water through her veins. Her former boss, the woman who had built a career on taking credit for the ideas of others and extinguishing any spark that wasn't her own. The woman who had stood in an office that smelled of expensive lemon polish and suffocating ambition, and told her that her project was a drain on resources, and that her vision lacked practical application. The memory was seared into her mind, as vivid and painful as the day it happened. The crisp, dismissive tone, devoid of any empathy. The way Meredith hadn't quite met her eyes as she'd slid the termination papers across the polished mahogany desk, her manicured nails tapping a death knell on the glossy wood. "It's just business, Alara," she had said, a hollow platitude that offered no comfort, no apology. "We have to prioritize shareholder value." Fired. It wasn't just the loss of a job. It was the attempted assassination of her dream. Meredith had not only closed a door but had tried to convince Alara that the entire hallway was a dead end, that her ideas were worthless. And now, here she was. Meredith, looking immaculate in a tailored silk dress that probably cost more than Alara's first car, moving through the crowd with the same predatory grace Alara remembered. She wasn't just a guest. She was holding court, networking, her sharp, confident laughter cutting through the ballroom's hum. Why was she here? This event was a celebration of the very innovation she had tried to extinguish. It was a monument to the idea she had declared dead on arrival. A bitter, hot wave of anger washed over Alara, so potent it almost made her dizzy. It felt profane. Her presence here. A desecration of this moment. Thomas felt her tense, her fingers going rigid in his. "What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing with concern as he followed her gaze. His eyes landed on Meredith, and a flicker of recognition, then cold, hard understanding passed over his face. He didn't need to ask for details. He had been the one to find her in her car in the parking lot 2 years ago, long after she was supposed to have left that office building, letting her rage and weep until the sorrow gave way to a quiet, steely resolve. "I can't believe she has the audacity to show her face here," Alara whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Of all places. It feels like she's here to steal this too, to somehow claim a piece of it, to rewrite history so she was a part of it all along." "No," Thomas said, his voice firm, his grip tightening on her hand, turning her face gently towards him. "No one can steal this from you. This is your night. Look at me. She is a footnote in your story, Alara, not the main character, a villain you defeated. Don't let her dim this moment. Don't let her have that power." But her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Meredith had started to move in their direction, a polite, fixed smile on her face as she navigated the tables with practiced ease. It felt like a slow-motion collision, a past she thought she had buried hurtling toward her present. The glorious symphony of the ballroom faded, replaced by the frantic drumbeat of her own pulse. Every step Meredith took was an echo of the footsteps that had approached her office door on that final day. The smile she wore was the same vacant, professional smile she'd given Alara just before shattering her world. The collision was inevitable. Meredith's approach was not a simple walk. It was a glide. She moved through the room like a shark, the crowds of formally dressed guests parting before her as if by instinct. Alara watched her, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth, the meticulously prepared salmon tasting like ash. Every step Meredith took was deliberate, her path weaving through the tables with an unnerving precision that brought her directly to them. She stopped, a vision in emerald silk, her smile never faltering, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Those eyes, the same cool, calculating gray Alara remembered from 100 budget meetings, scanned the table before landing on her. "Alara, darling," Meredith said, the endearment a tiny poisoned dart. "I almost didn't recognize you." Her gaze swept over Alara's gown, her professionally styled hair. "It's been what, 2 years? You look prosperous. Success suits you." She gestured vaguely towards the stage, a silent, almost proprietary acknowledgement of the award that was the centerpiece of the evening. Thomas stood up, a solid, protective presence beside Alara, his 6'2" frame a sudden and imposing wall. "Meredith," he said, his tone perfectly civil but with an underlying frost that could have chilled champagne. "I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here." "Oh, my company has a table," Meredith replied with a dismissive wave of her hand, as if her presence was the most natural thing in the world. A foregone conclusion. "We believe in supporting the community, fostering new talent." The hypocrisy was so thick Alara felt she could choke on it. And when I saw Alara's name on the list of honorees, I was so genuinely pleased. Truly. She looked back at Alara, her head tilted in a gesture of feigned maternal wisdom. "I always knew you had the spark of a brilliant idea, Alara. It just needed refinement, the right circumstances to truly flourish." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The suggestion that being fired, that being told her life's work was a drain on resources, was somehow the right circumstance she needed. It was a masterful, cruel rewriting of history. The audacity of it stole Alara's breath. Thomas's hand rested on the back of her chair, his knuckles white, a silent offering of support. But the decision of how to react, whether to swallow the poison or to spit it back, was hers alone. The anger that had been simmering within her now boiled over, hot and cleansing. Thomas's words echoed in her mind. "She is a footnote in your story, not the main character." It was time to edit her out completely. Alara rose slowly from her chair, her movements calm and measured, a stark contrast to the tempest inside her. She placed her napkin deliberately on the table and met Meredith's gaze directly, refusing to be the intimidated 20-something subordinate anymore. "The right circumstances, Meredith?" Alara's voice was low, steady, but laced with an icy precision that cut through the ballroom's hum. "I'm a little confused. Are you referring to the circumstance where you called my project a fiscally irresponsible dead end in front of the entire executive board? Or perhaps you mean the circumstance where you fired me, clearing my desk into a cardboard box yourself, and told me my vision was a charming but useless fantasy?" Meredith's smile tightened at the edges, the first crack in the polished facade. A flicker of surprise, or perhaps annoyance, crossed her features. She hadn't expected this direct, fact-checked challenge. She had expected a timid nod. "I think you're misremembering, Alara," she said, her voice dropping a register. "That was constructive criticism. I was encouraging you to be more independent. Sometimes a push, a firm one, is necessary to get a fledgling to leave the nest. You should see it as a test, one that you have, clearly, passed with flying colors. I'm proud of you." The word proud was a match to gasoline. "Proud?" Alara let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor, and she saw Meredith flinch. "No, you don't get to be proud, Meredith. You get to sit at your company's table and watch me accept an award for the very work you tried to bury. You tried to end my career because my vision didn't fit into your narrow, risk-averse world. Let's be perfectly clear. You didn't push me to fly. You threw me off a cliff and told the board I'd jumped. The fact that I built my own wings on the way down has absolutely nothing to do with you." The polite chatter from the surrounding tables had now completely died. An awkward bubble of silence expanded around them as people pretended to be engrossed in their desserts. Meredith's face, for the first time, lost its polished composure. The mask slipped, revealing a flash of raw, unfiltered fury. She was no longer a graceful executive. She was the woman in the lemon-scented office, wielding her power with casual cruelty. "You have a very selective memory and a highly inflated sense of self-worth," Meredith hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You were reckless, unfocused. I saved the company from your disastrous, time-wasting pet project." "You mean the disastrous pet project that is now revolutionizing the industry and putting my name on that crystal statuette?" Alara retorted, gesturing toward the stage without breaking eye contact. "So let me say this, and I want you to hear it. Thank you. Thank you for saving your company from my work. It was, without a doubt, the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to save my dream from you." Before Meredith could formulate a response, the lights in the ballroom dimmed dramatically, and a smooth, disembodied voice boomed from the speakers, requesting all guests to take their seats as the awards ceremony was about to begin. The interruption was a reprieve. Meredith, flustered and exposed, her face a thunderous mask of rage, shot Alara one last glare. It was a look that promised retribution, a silent vow that this was not over. Then she turned on her heel and stalked back to her table across the room. Alara sank back into her chair, her body trembling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. Thomas sat beside her, taking her hand. It was as cold as ice. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers. She looked at him, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. It was the first one of the night that reached her eyes. "I am," she said, her voice filled with a newfound, unshakable strength. "I really am." The ghost from her past had been faced, not as a terrifying specter, but as a bitter, diminished woman. The final chain of Meredith's influence had just been shattered. Now, the night was truly, completely hers. The lights softened, bathing the room in a warm, expectant glow. The master of ceremonies, a man with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, returned to the podium. He began to speak about the spirit of innovation, the courage to challenge the status quo, and the relentless dedication required to turn a raw idea into a tangible reality. The words, which would have sounded like hollow platitudes an hour ago, now resonated with a profound, hard-won truth. Each phrase felt like a validation of her own secret struggles. Thomas leaned over, his voice a low, proud whisper in her ear, his breath warm against her cheek. "That was magnificent. You left her with nothing to say." Alara squeezed his hand, a silent thank you that conveyed more than words ever could. For a final, fleeting moment, she allowed her gaze to drift across the room. She found Meredith's table. Her former boss sat rigid in her chair, a mask of strained civility plastered on her face, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was applauding politely along with the rest of the audience for a preliminary speaker, but her eyes were fixed on the stage with a venomous, laser-like intensity. For the first time, Alara saw her not as a giant or a gatekeeper, but as she truly was, a small, bitter woman clinging to a narrative of control that had just been publicly dismantled. She was a relic of a past Alara had just triumphantly, irrevocably escaped. "And now, for our final and most prestigious award of the evening," the announcer boomed, his voice filling the grand ballroom. "The Innovator of the Year. This award recognizes a true visionary, an individual whose work has not only forged a new path, but has fundamentally disrupted an entire industry by refusing to accept the limitations of today." A short, slickly produced video began to play on the large screens on either side of the stage. The opening shot was a stylized animation of complex data streams. It detailed Alara's work on a new, decentralized data encryption algorithm, one that offered unprecedented security and efficiency. It showed interviews with cybersecurity experts who praised its elegance and revolutionary approach. Then, the narrator's voice deepened. The core concept for this technology was, remarkably, initially dismissed by legacy firms as being too theoretical, too ambitious, a solution for a problem they couldn't yet see. Alara smiled, a genuine, private smile. They couldn't have phrased it better if she had written the script herself. From a solo venture born of sheer conviction, her company, Vance Innovations, has in just 2 years secured patents in 17 countries and is already poised to become the new gold standard in digital security. The voiceover concluded over sweeping shots of her small, bustling office. "Ladies and gentlemen, the 2025 Innovator of the Year is Alara Vance." The room erupted in applause, a wave of sound that washed over her. A brilliant white spotlight found her, and for a second she was blinded, isolated in a circle of pure light. Thomas was on his feet instantly, pulling her into a fierce kiss filled with 2 years of love, pride, and shared belief. As she stood, the applause seemed to lift her, carrying her towards the stage. The walk felt both infinitely long and over in an instant. She passed her new team, her small, dedicated group of engineers who had believed in her when she was armed with little more than a concept and a fierce, unyielding determination. They were all on their feet, cheering, their faces alight with shared victory. She shook the presenter's hand and accepted the award. It was heavy, substantial, its cool, solid crystal a tangible manifestation of her dream. Real. She stepped up to the microphone, and the roar of applause slowly faded into an expectant hush. She looked out at the sea of faces, hundreds of them, no longer an anonymous crowd, but a gathering of individual witnesses to her victory. "Thank you," she began, her voice astonishingly steady and clear. "I am truly overwhelmed and deeply honored. An idea is a fragile thing. To see it grow into this is everything. There are so many people to thank." She smiled, her eyes finding her husband in the crowd. "First, my husband, Thomas. You are the rock on which I built everything. Your faith in me never wavered even, and especially when my own did." She then thanked her team, calling them the finest, most brilliant, and bravest minds I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Then she paused, taking a breath, her eyes sweeping the room, not searching for Meredith, but addressing the spirit of the entire journey. "Innovation is a strange and beautiful thing," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's a profound act of faith. It's the stubborn belief in an idea that no one else can see. It often begins in small, quiet places, in late-night scribbles on a legal pad, in moments of deep frustration and crippling self-doubt. And the hardest part is that it requires you to hold on to that belief, to protect it fiercely, especially when the world, and the people who claim to know better, tell you it's impossible." She lifted the crystal award slightly, letting it catch the light. "So this award isn't just for me, and it isn't just for my team. It's for every person who has ever been told that their idea was a drain on resources. It's for anyone who has ever had their vision, their passion, dismissed as a charming but useless fantasy." A quiet gasp, a collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. It was a direct hit, a perfectly aimed arrow, but delivered with such poised grace that it soared above mere revenge and became a universal anthem of resilience. She didn't need to look at Meredith's table to know the arrow had found its mark. The silence that followed was more telling than any applause. "To all of you out there, the dreamers, the builders, the ones who refuse to quit," Alara concluded, her voice ringing with a passion that filled every corner of the vast room. "Don't let anyone extinguish your spark. Protect your useless fantasies. Nurture them. Fight for them. Because sometimes those quiet, impossible ideas have the power to change the world. Thank you." This time, the applause was thunderous, immediate, and overwhelming. It was a standing ovation, not out of polite obligation, but from a place of genuine emotion. As she walked off the stage, the weight of the award in her hand a comforting ballast against the tide of emotion, she saw Thomas waiting for her at the bottom of the steps, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The night was no longer a trial to be endured, but a memory to be cherished, a cornerstone for the future. As she reached him and fell into his arms, she took one last, sweeping glance towards Meredith's table. It was empty. The chair was pushed back, the wine glass half full. The ghost had vanished, not with a bang, but with a silent, ignominious retreat into the shadows, defeated by the light. The ballroom was just a ballroom again. The symphony of celebration was finally her own, and the future was a brilliant, open, and endless road.